Rabbi Altshuler is from Los Angeles, California, where he attended the University of Judaism for his first 2 years of rabbinic school, studied a year in Israel at Hebrew University, and was ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York in 1980, and has been a member of the Rabbinical Assembly since then. Rabbi Altshuler also obtained his doctoral degree in Jewish history from the Jewish Theological Seminary and has taught at several universities. He is a distinguished author. Currently, he is the author of, the rabbi of Belsize Square Synagogue in London, where he has served the congregation since January 2011 and is looking forward to being with his new TBS family. He is married to Elalea and is father to Alana, Eitan, and Micah, who is a university student at the University of Surrey. With that, I wish to introduce to you Rabbi Stuart Altshuler. Take it away.
Thank you. I'm going to hope this works. My screen here. I hope you all can see this.
We can see it.
Good. Well, this brief history of anti-Semitism, I have given a full semester course on the subject, so hopefully this will be the beginnings of further courses and things that Al and I will try to put together for everyone. So it's just the beginning. It's a huge topic. It's a very timely topic. Just for example, in the UK here, anti-Semitic incidents since the violence against Israel broke out is up 250%. We have security guards here always, which is something, thank God, we don't have to worry about. But here, for all of our services, we always have 3 security guards. They're unarmed, but they are in close touch with the police here. And we've had to double that security because of the threats that we worry about. So that is the reality. And on the one hand, we shouldn't be surprised after what we're going to be sharing today. I think you will see that one of the great dilemmas, paradoxes with being Jewish, we're so pleased and proud of who we are. Our Judaism, our way of life, it's a peaceful and beautiful way of life. We've influenced the world as no other group of people, especially with our numbers. And yet we've had to deal with this eternal, completely historical aberration, this hatred of anti-Semitism that has been a part of us since we became a people. So it's important to understand it. It's important to understand it not only because of what has happened, but I think it gives us a great deal of strength. Through knowledge comes strength in trying to understand what's happening today as well, because it's something that we can understand, but we should always be shocked at its ramifications. But it is who we are. It's part of our legacy. And I think we should begin at least the short process in trying to understand what it is we're dealing with. So I offer a few questions that I think are really important. And that is, how is anti-Semitism different from all other hatreds? This is a really important question because it tends to get blurred into racism and other isms, and yet we should understand that it is a completely unique phenomenon. What is the common element in each era of history? There are essentially 4 phases that we're going to be discussing: classical period, medieval period, modern period, and what I call postmodern. We haven't really figured out what to call it yet. And anti-Semitism has existed from the beginning, but it changes its tune. It metastasizes. It grows. It builds on the past. Who knows what will be in the future? The dangers of universalizing anti-Semitism is one of my favorite topics, by the way, especially with the way that the Shoah Holocaust is taught. This was a big issue here in the UK, and I got involved in it because there was a big discussion about opening up a Holocaust museum. And the question is how you teach the Shoah, which relates to the question how you teach anti-Semitism. And there's a huge tendency to make the Holocaust like every other genocide or every other hatred. And it's not. There's a reason why there was specifically Jew hatred during the Shoah, before and during. It is a particular problem of a world disease called anti-Semitism. It can't be universalized. And this is not to detract from other isms, other racisms, other hatreds. They're all terrible. But anti-Semitism can't be blurred into the other tragedies of history. It is unique, as the Shoah is unique. And that also deserves its own course in and of itself, just on the Shoah. Has anti-Semitism kept the Jewish people alive? You'll hear that often. I dispute that very much so, because our people have thrived when there hasn't been anti-Semitism, not when there has been hatred. We could do without it very easily, and we would be a much stronger and better people and a more vibrant religion. But that's an interesting subject, and I leave that there. There are no clear answers there, but I leave that with you. And this is perhaps a little controversial. How have Jews contributed to anti-Semitism? Now, we tend to think of that in the negative. You know, how dare they point to our power, or they distort who we are. But there is a factor of our success, our religion, the influence we've had on the world. There's factors called jealousies, envies, and they have to be part of the discussion. I'm not saying we should ever eliminate any of those factors. We're going to get to that at the end of the subject, and how to struggle against anti-Semitism. So those are some of the questions. There are many others, but at least to get us started. So the first thing I wanted to share with you is the question, the word anti-Semitism. I just saw, it was a couple of weeks ago, that there was some official pronouncement made. I'm not sure if it was here in England or in the United States, but we should be spelling the word anti-Semitism like this, not with a capital S and not with a dash. Because even though that was the way it was originally spelled, the word anti-Semitism with a capital S was coined by this gentleman named Wilhelm Marr in 1879. He was frankly an anti-Semite, a German provocateur, journalist, who was interested in starting a political and cultural movement against Jews. And he outlined his strategy in a very important booklet that became popular in Germany and Austria and elsewhere in Europe, and really set off the word anti-Semitism. His idea was racial. The idea is that Jews were Semites. They weren't part of the Teutonic Germanic Aryan peoples. And so therefore, because of the, as he would say, the degraded, disgusting, inferior racial, biological characteristics of Jews, we have to be anti-Semites. He didn't get into the subject of other Semitic peoples who are not Jewish. But in the 19th century, racial anti-Semitism became extremely popular. And he was the one who really founded the specifics, the name, the movement, the culture. So it is an interesting fact of history that we use the term anti-Semitism, but it was coined by an anti-Semite, but that's become the popular term. And I do think it's best, in order to degrade what Marr was trying to do, to use the small letters to define a movement. A lot of people don't even like using the word anti-Semitism because of the origins of the word. Some like using the word anti-Jewishness or Jew hatred. But we live in the world in which this has become popularized. And so we have used this, but I think this is a good compromise between what Marr intended it to be and what it is. He had no intention of creating any movement against Arabs or other Semites. It was entirely a Jewish phenomenon. That's why when someone who is Arab says, how can I be an anti-Semite if I'm a Semite? And the answer to that is, you don't know what the word anti-Semitism, where it came from. It was specifically used to describe Jew hatred. And so therefore, an Arab certainly can be an anti-Semite, as peoples all over the globe. So that's a little bit of the history of the term. And the other thing that we have learned about anti-Semitism is that it cuts across. What is unique about it, it's not a domain of the left or of the right or any particular ideology or religion or political movement. It has cut across every single facet of ideological struggle since the beginning of the world. I've been very close with Natan Sharansky. It's a long story. I'll tell you about that at some other point. I wrote a book about our movement that he was very helpful in putting that together. And anyway, we have a long shared history. But he, and I recommend very highly his most recent book that he wrote with Gil Troy. It's really excellent. And he has said this often recently, and he's right. He said, we Jews have to be careful about those who love Israel and hate Jews, but also be careful about those who say they love Jews and hate Israel. They're all part of this very confusing mix of ideological structures, because anti-Semitism has cut across since the beginning of time, the years of pagan history, the Middle Ages during the religious periods, secular world and ideologies, Marxist ideology, fascist ideology. And this didn't print well, but what I wanted to say here is that what have been the worst episodes of anti-Semitism? I just mentioned a few. It's interesting. I always said anti-Semitism, the ideology of anti-Semitism begins with the first chapter of the book of Exodus. If you remember, that's when there's a new Pharaoh, doesn't know Joseph. And what is the first thing he does? He sets off on a propaganda campaign. They're too numerous. They're propagating. They're taking us over. Anti-Semitism always begins with propaganda. And then what did the Pharaoh do next? Then he isolated the Jews. He put them into bondage, slavery, separation. And the last thing he did was kill the firstborn male children. So that's what's so unusual by anti-Semitism. It begins with ideology. It moves towards separation, and then it ends up in violence. I leave that with you. It's a very important paradigm of history. The other interesting text is from the book of Esther. You know the story of Haman, and we'll get to that interesting episode. But the book of Esther, in the beginning of the 3rd chapter of the book of Esther, there's a definition of anti-Semitism that a lot of scholars have chosen to use, and that is, and I don't have the text right in front of me, but if you look it up, it really captures it. These Jews have different laws, different customs, different language, different way of life. They are not like us, and therefore, well, you know the rest of the Purim story. That began Haman's efforts to annihilate the Jewish people. Of course, we celebrate because he failed. The other episodes I mentioned here, just as a way of keeping track of the history: Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, around 170, did something that no other pagan leader did, and that is to announce the persecution of Judaism. the intrusion of the emperor worship on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which in 168 set off the Maccabean revolt that lasted for 3 years. The success of that, we celebrate Hanukkah today. But that was a huge turning point in the relationship between Jews and pagan leaders, which was going to affect us during the Roman period. First century Rome led to the first Jewish revolt in 66, led to the second Jewish destruction of the temple, Tisha B'Av, all that. 135 CE, following the Bar Kokhba revolt. What most people don't know is that after the Bar Kokhba revolt failed, 1/3, that's that number we're used to from our contemporary history, 1/3 of the Jewish people was murdered by the Romans. A complete evacuation, genocide from the Judean area. And it's amazing that we survived that, frankly. The Byzantine expulsions from the land of Israel with the onset of Christianity in the early years, the Islamic jihad after the Jews refused to convert to Islam, Muhammad, and this, by the way, is coming back in a lot of the rhetoric today. Listen, you Jews, remember what Muhammad did back in 630 before he died? He declared jihad against the Jews. The Hudaybiyah treaties he ripped up and began a campaign of massive annihilation, murder of the Jewish population there. Of course, I can't see this now. I mentioned here the blood libels during the medieval period in Christianity, desecration of the host, the Crusades, the various expulsions of the Jews at various. I'm going to move so I can see here. How do I do this? Here we go. That's a little better here. I couldn't see my own words. I mentioned just the various tragedies that occurred during the Middle Ages. One of my specialties is Spain 1492 and Portugal 1497, the greatest mass expulsions of any population in the history of the world. The numbers aren't what they are today, but for that time, it was complete and total. And what we learn here in England in 1290, all the Jews of England were expelled from the country and not allowed back in England until 1651 by Oliver Cromwell. The Jews were expelled 7 times from France. They were expelled various times from Germany between the 14th and 16th century. Well, it's all part of the tragic history, the burning of the Talmud and Jewish sacred texts. Another episode, major turning point in Jewish history, were the Khmelnytsky massacres in 1640. Actually, there were 3 different periods of that, the worst year being 1648. Again, it's estimated about 1/3 of the Jewish population was murdered between the Ukrainian national uprisings against the Poles. The Jews were in the middle. And what scholars have noted is that of the brutality that we had, even compared to the Middle Ages, we had never seen brutality like this before. And I have to tell you, I think I've made many trips to the former Soviet Union to help Soviet Jews there. And my family was in Kiev. I used to have family there. My great aunt and my cousin has since passed away. But when I visited them in Kiev, used to see statues of Bogdan Khmelnytsky all over the city of Kiev. He's their national hero. But what we know he did to the Jewish people is beyond discussion. I couldn't, even if I wanted to share what he did in terms of brutality, I would be embarrassed to even share that with you. So if you ever want to read about a precursor to Adolf Hitler, the Nazis, the Khmelnytsky massacres, the pogroms in the Russian Empire that began in full steam in 1881 and lasted through the Russian Civil War in 1924. The reason why I'm here with you today is because I was lucky to have grandparents, like many of you, who were fortunate enough to be able to leave that godforsaken place and come to America. But the brutality was horrible, and again, worth greater discussion. Dreyfus in Western Europe, what set Western Europe afire in the late 19th century. Of course, the Shoah, beyond words of description, Stalin's persecution of Jews. And I threw in this also because I think it's very important with today, Iran and their attempts to achieve the eradication of the Jewish state. So those are many. I might have forgotten some, but you get the idea. It's been a very total picture. Now, I mentioned this here too, before we get into specifics. We have two major minor Jewish festivals, as you know, Purim and Chanukah. There are a lot of different lessons that we derive from these great holidays, of which we celebrate and have such joy. But behind the celebrations are some pretty serious challenges to Jewish existence. We have Purim. I just mentioned, we know the story. Haman wanted to annihilate every Jew on the planet, or at least in the Persian Empire, which was the largest empire at the time. A total bodily assault against the very physical existence of the Jewish people. And Hanukkah was an attempt to eradicate not the Jews, but Judaism. So we have two of the major efforts in history to eradicate the Jews, to eradicate Judaism. And isn't it interesting, by the way, because Purim is an assault against the physical body of the Jewish people, what are the major mitzvot of Purim? Mishloach manot, sending food, having Seudat HaMitzvah, having the great meal of celebration, eating, and there's no Hallel, which we do at Hanukkah, is a more spiritual, the recitation of the Psalms, the lighting of the Chanukiah, which is a symbol of the temple worship in Jerusalem. Purim is physical, Hanukkah is spiritual, but they're both important. They're both two cogs in the historical picture that I'm sharing with you. Permanence. Even as we know, even when Jews aren't living in particular places, are insignificant numerically, Jews have been a major subject of discussion. It's even taking place today where very few Jews live. And the paradigm I wanted to share with you is 18th century France, which to me was a turning point in the way that the world debated the Jewish question. There weren't many Jews living in France. There were a few living in the Bordeaux regions, all Sephardic Jews that had been there for a couple centuries, and Germanic Jews who had settled in the Alsace-Lorraine eastern part of France. So the fact is that the major schools of France had very little contact with Jews at all. But there was a major debate about Jews from the two major philosophical schools, and that is of Montesquieu and Voltaire. Enlightenment philosophers. The idea was that in Enlightenment, human beings are human beings. People deserve to have, all peoples, whether they be Jew or Gentile, deserve to have civil liberties and whatnot. But there was a major discussion about that, whether that could happen. And Montesquieu was what we would call a champion of the Jews. This is in the 1730s. Montesquieu taught that the Jews could be just like the French. They could live among us. However, they had to get rid of their disgusting religion. And he proposed that it would take 3 generations to get rid of the poison that made Jews who they were today. But he believed in the universal human spirit. If we teach Jews to be civilized, to be Christian, to absorb Christian values, to speak French, to become French nationals, in 3 generations, There won't be Jews as we know them today. That was his vision. And there were what we would call, in their terminology, philo-Semites, who actually championed the right of Jews to become Jews as individuals, but not as a people. That was enunciated very clearly in the National Assembly in 1789. Voltaire, who had the larger following, who is still considered the god of French Enlightenment, I hope you know that he was a rabid anti-Semite. He said to Montesquieu, "You're crazy. You can teach the Jews how to speak French. They can live in our neighborhoods, but they will always be Jews, a barbaric, disgusting, vile people. They can never be integrated into France." And that was much of the debate in the modern period, which, as Arthur Hertzberg, the great writer, conservative rabbi, who I knew a little bit towards the end of his career as rabbi, his book, French Enlightenment and the Jews, is a classic. And he writes about that quite well. So this is just an example of how permanent anti-Semitism has been a part of the discussion of all parts of the Western world in particular. We all know that 85% of the UN resolutions are anti-Israel today. That should raise some alarming questions. What happened to North Korea, Syria? Assad only killed 550,000 people, not a whimper of reaction. Iran, the rest of the brutalities in the world. No, Israel, 85%. They just came out with a poll here of children in the United Kingdom, and I don't know what the similarities would be, but I guess it might not be too far away in the United States. But they asked children what they believe was the most evil nation in the world, and Israel nosed out North Korea. It was like 41 to 40%, Israel compared to North Korea. So that's it. And we know how anti-Semitism has pervaded literature, Chaucer, Shakespeare, art, music, Wagner, and all the way down the line. What are the reasons for anti-Semitism? I'm looking at the clock to make sure that we have plenty of time when I get to that. All kinds of reasons have been offered: economic, need for scapegoats, xenophobia, resentment, religious bigotry, and Jewish existence. They have their God, their laws, their peoplehood, their affluence, their literacy. Hatred for just Jews being different is a very important factor in all those, but they all beg the question. They all ignite certain hatreds, but they are not singular explanations for the phenomenon. There have been attempts to try to, like Montesquieu, to try to make Jews the way we are in Rome, Christianity, Islam, Luther, Lenin, all attempts to try to get the Jews to just disappear already. You don't have to be Jewish. You can jump in and be part of the majority. And it's interesting that a lot of the fury against Jews, whether it be in the 2nd century with John, the gospel writer, or Muhammad at the end of his career, or Martin Luther in 1539, at the end of his writings, he became a virulent anti-Semite. Lenin, who threw out the only socialist party in the world, was the Jewish Bund, and that's because the Bund wanted to remain Jewish. And in all those cases, another uniqueness of anti-Semitism is that Jews refuse to become like the majority. And it's something we always have to be aware of. I think that's a lot of the issues regarding Israel today as well. But I leave that with you as well. We're moving through more quickly here because, again, we have 15 minutes. I want to make sure we have some comments. Just to give you an overview, again, these all deserve courses unto themselves. But in the classic period, Greco-Roman period, pagan anti-Semitism, which in comparison to what happened later on, wasn't as bad, because from a pagan point of view, They respected the gods of different lands. As long as the Jews were faithful taxpayers, didn't upset the empire, most pagan rulers were able to accommodate the existence of an autonomous Jewish world. That was the general principle of paganism. So if you were a Jew, I suppose, if you chose any of these periods to live in, you probably would have wanted to live sometime in the pagan period. Not that it was great, because already by the 3rd century in Egypt and Alexandria, Manetho, he was a very well-known philosopher, led an anti-Semitic campaign against the Jews of Alexandria. And many have said that this was the precursor to what Antiochus IV did, the Seleucid Greek emperor who began the persecution of Judaism and of the temple and led to the Maccabean Revolt. Another one, Al, that we should invite is Martin Goodman. He teaches Jewish history at Oxford University. We're good friends. And his specialty is this period. He wrote a book called Roman Jerusalem. I recommend it very highly. He's a tremendous scholar. He also has a new book called The History of Judaism, which is excellent, but this is his best book. Jews were considered to be threats to the national gods when there was tension that developed. The commonality was that the Jews threatened this universal culture, the universal moral law. As Tacitus wrote, Jews were in revolt against humanity, a nation apart. They do not share the libations and sacrifices of the good Roman people. This is the period of cosmos, the period when everything was looked in terms of nature, and when Jews were seen as being contrary to nature and commonality and threatening the entire nation, Weltanschauung, then Jews were subject to ridicule. And that continued in the Roman period. Caligula, the emperor, crazy emperor of Rome, who was upset that the Jews would not recognize him as a god. That's in around the year 45 of the Common Era. Cicero, the great orator, Tacitus, they were all anti-Semites. Tacitus wrote, the Jews have an implacable hatred for mankind. Jewish morality was considered the chief factor here. The Jewish God was threatening. They rejected the pagan gods. And by the way, you should know this, another part of the history of anti-Semitism. You ask people, who are the first atheists, quote unquote? And the answer is the Jews, because they were atheist. They were against the gods. And we have another banner to our name. Welcome, all you dear people. We share atheism, at least according to Cicero, Tacitus, Livy, Caligula, and all the others who hated us. Another interesting thing that Martin Goodman brings out is a huge factor in Jewish morality was, Plato was already adored, revered, the Greek philosopher by the 1st century or whatever. And Plato in his Republic, because the God was nature, he believed that in order to secure harmony in nature, that all children who were born deformed, handicapped, mentally or physically, frankly, should be killed. That's the way you create a better nature. You pass down, I don't know how much they knew about genetics, but they certainly knew that it would eliminate those possibilities. And of course, who opposed that more than any other group? The Jews, Judaism. That wasn't a part in our scheme about the sanctity of life. They pointed to the fact that Jews banned intermarriage, observed the dietary laws, Shabbat, holiday. These were different people. They were anti-civilization. Then we moved to the Middle Ages, and that's the period of Theos, the period of God, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And each of the three believed that they were had the special beeline. The Jews were unusual because we had no territory and no ability to defend ourselves. But in Christianity, of course, it got worse in the inheritance of Rome, because not only did the Jews deny civilization, they killed God, the charge of deicide. Jesus the Jew, who the Jews, according to John and in the early Christian father writings, the Jews were a devil people, and they're satanic, and they should be isolated. The most astounding and important doctrine in Christianity was from Augustine in the 5th century. His theology has never been excised from the Catholic Church to this day. And he was asked the question, why should the Jews be allowed to stay alive? Kind of an odd question, but these Jews weren't disappearing. They weren't converting. So he said there must be a divine plan. The Jews should be alive because, one, they are important to know, for Christians to know the transmission from the Old Testament to the New Testament. So therefore, it's good to keep them around, number one. Number two, they must remain in a degraded stage because that proves to the truth of Christianity. And it's important for Christians to see the consequences to a people, a religion that rejects Christianity, Jesus. So God does that on purpose. And number three, remember, Augustine said the Jews killed Jesus. So therefore, what was the punishment? The punishment was not death. The first murder was Cain killing Abel. What was Cain? He had a mark of Cain, and he was meant to wander the earth, the wandering Jew. So they should stay alive, but be dehumanized. Sadly, that was the doctrine of the Catholic Church for centuries and later Middle Ages. We know about the relationship between Martin Luther and the Shoah. The Shoah, we should also inherited all this. Hitler would point out very often, his links with Luther. The Shoah took place primarily in Christian Europe. A little caveat, Christianity is going through a lot of changes today, especially in the United States, and that's worthy of discussion on how and why Christianity has been able to dissolve some of its own theology. Going through this quickly, Islam, the Jews rejected Muhammad, and because of that, they lived in a state of a demi-state, second-class citizenship, degradation and insecurity. Also, Islam superseded Judaism, which was the claim of both Christianity and Islam. Jews in the Quran are seen as forgers of scripture, unreliable, evil. They were subject to specific dress and limitations. They didn't suffer as much in the Christian world, but there were outbreaks. We know Maimonides' own family was a victim of the Almohads, and when was around 1155, his family was evacuated from Cordoba and the mass expulsion of the Jews from there. And Islam, we have to deal with this today because a lot of Islam is still living in the Middle Ages, which is another whole separate story. But there is a doctrine in Islam that land that once belonged to Islam is Dar al-Islam, must always belong to Islam. And that has fueled a lot of the political struggles that we're still seeing today. Case of Spain is unusual, where there were periods of glory of Jews living with Christians and Muslims. And a lot of that is due to the fact that Jews weren't the only minority and were needed to be a buffer between the two. But that is also something that should be studied on its own. And then we have the Enlightenment. I mentioned Montesquieu and Voltaire. And Hertzberg's theory is that Jews basically had no way out with that kind of discussion. Philosophical anti-Semitism that crept into all kinds of things in biblical scholarship, intellectual anti-Semitism, science that was introduced by Darwin in 1839, the Darwin philosophy, which wasn't Darwin, but it led to 19th century racial theories, as was the case before the Jews were expelled from Spain, but it became popularized, part of the culture, the politics, the nationality, especially by the mid-19th century. And that's what we know as racial and anthropological anti-Semitism. That's why this period is called the period of Anthros. So we have religion, culture, nationality, and race thrown into the picture. That's why the great philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, one of my favorite subjects, by the way, to teach, in which he said, listen, folks, we're living in a period of progress and race and nation. This Jewish morality of the Exodus, of worrying about the oppressed, has to go to the Ubermensch, to the successful racial superiors, and in many ways, that prepared a lot of the philosophical groundwork for what we know as the Shoah, the greatest mass murder in the history of civilization. So wrapping it up today, because we got 2 minutes left, I want to leave some comments. What do we inherit today? Every stripe, ethnic, from the classical period, historical, political, economic, racial, national, is all part of the mix of today. The uniqueness of the Shoah, of course, the only attempt to annihilate a group of people, no matter where they lived. 77.2% of all European Jewry was murdered within a 4-year period. And as I mentioned here, the challenge of the West is still dealing with this, pacifying themselves as if it didn't happen, offering moral advice to Jews who survived this, to Israel today. It's one of the great challenges of the West. And it also explains this great hatred towards Israel today. And that is the interesting question. Because it's not popular to be a racial anti-Semite in the 19th century. So it's metastasized into this virulent anti-Zionism. And if there's anybody who doubts the relationship between anti-Zionism, anti-Israel, and anti-Semitism, is just experience what we all had to hear on one of the major streets cutting through the Jewish neighborhood, Finchley Road. What happened in Israel was death to the Jews, frankly. And it was worse than that. I'm putting a mild veil over what we had to hear. And of course, it leads to the question, can you be critical of Israel and not anti-Semitic? And the answer to that is, of course, yes. We could have all kinds of discussions about Israel, whether they're doing the right thing or not doing the right thing. But there are lines. And we've seen a lot of it in these recent days that cross the line. Double standards, hypocrisy, blood libels, libeling Israel as murderers of children. It's quite astounding. And again, this is an issue that we're still struggling with. The case of Ilhan Omar, the squad today. Are they anti-Semitic? Are they not? Fake history. I'm dealing with this all the time. You just cannot believe what is written about the history of the Jews and the history of Israel from so-called scholars today. The assault of anti-Semitism is not just physical, it is ideological and academic as well. As I mentioned in Sharansky, who asked the question in his book, what is to be done about this? Well, he offered the following. One thing, we can convert or assimilate. That's not a very good solution and never worked for those Jews who tried to do that. We can all go and live in Israel, but as we know, that hasn't eliminated anti-Semitism at all, even though that was Theodor Herzl's dream. We know with the assault against Israel, that certainly is far from happening. We can fight it. And as I propose, number 4, we can be Jewish. Remember who we are, the necessity of being Jewish, and the need to change this struggling world that we're living in today. And we have this mandate, as Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote, the Jews are a messenger who forgot his message. We have that message. We have to be strong. We owe it to ourselves, our children, and to humanity. That's the only way to fight anti-Semitism, because if we don't, it's going to overwhelm not only us, but as we've seen in World War II, there were 55 million people killed in that war. And it all was ignited by this obsession with Jews. Anti-Semitism remains a barometer of the state of our world. Let me turn it over now to you. I'm going to stop the share so I can see you. And
well, thank you, Rabbi, for an amazing
hope-
presentation. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you still talking?
No, I went through things rather quickly, but I think you get a pretty good scheme of at least a roadmap for what we're dealing with and still dealing with today. I think that's important, by the way, to note that, it's not just Israel in the news today, at this moment. It's a lot of baggage from hundreds of years. And we need to recognize that. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to respond to all the many challenges. And I would guess, folks, I'm going to beautiful Temple Bet Shalom. I'm counting on living in very peaceful Sarasota, Florida. I'm planning on lighting those Shabbat candles with you people and laughing and living and loving like we're supposed to do. But I would bet you that we're going to have some challenges to face together. I hope not. I hope that all the anti-Semites disappear overnight. But given what we're reading about, we're going to have to be very together, tight, strong, and know who we are.
For sure.
And what are our options? We have to fight for our Jewish way of life, and we will. Because one of the things I always tell my students is that virtually in every period of history, we Jews could have, especially during the Middle Ages, Jews could have walked out of their Jewish neighborhoods, said, I want to become Christian, I want to become a Muslim, and be done with being Jewish, the liability of being Jewish. But they didn't. That is one of the greatest miracles of history, in my view. The Jews had an opportunity. It's like the Soviet Union tried to do. Let's eliminate Jewish life. Let's make Jews who want to remain Jewish miserable, close their synagogues, destroy their prayer books. We won't print anything in Hebrew. Zionism is an illegal option because we need to get them to assimilate and become Soviet citizens. It failed. Absolutely failed. I tried to tell some of that story in my book, by the way, and we'll have a chance to share more of that. But it is a feature of Jewish life that we choose to remain different. We know the consequences of that, but we want to preserve who we are. No other option. So anyway, maybe we'll have some questions or comments.
All right.
Take me to task.
Well, again, absolutely. It's a lot to absorb. It's a lot to unpack. But there's only so much you can cover in 45 minutes. I know.
I did the whole gamut of history in 45 minutes.
There is one thing that jumped out at me, amongst all of these things. Somebody. Okay, hold on a second. Somebody just. Oops. Here we go. Yeah. All right. So, one thing that jumped out at me before I ask others for their questions is when you mentioned this poll of British children.
Yeah.
That the most evil country in Israel actually nosed out North Korea. That disturbed me more than anything, I think, because all that other stuff, I mean, yeah, we know they hate us, but this does not bode well for the future of society.
And it's really amazing too, because it's not like we haven't made efforts to teach the children about the Shoah and what happened. And there are a lot of great people here in the UK who are really good friends of ours. I hope to share some of them along the line there. But it is disturbing. I always said, I use the figure 25% here. 25% of the United Kingdom is thoroughly anti-Semitic. We went through this campaign with Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. It was awful. It really was awful. And these were people in positions of authority, people who you would think would be careful about what they wrote or who they spoke to. And we saw the most obscene anti-Semitism ever. The Jewish community here went crazy. I was frankly trying to steer some of this to sanity, but it was really bad. And I don't want to give you the impression that I walked around here worried all day long, because in our particular neighborhood, which is a lot of Jews, a lot of Israelis live in where I live, we're sheltered from some of the bad spots, but it's here, and it's been proven in the polls that have been taken that the new generation especially just considers Israel to be a monster.
Well, the advent of social media makes it very easy to spread the big lie. You
Yeah,
can do it
all over the
just like
place.
that. You don't have to worry about printing things and waiting for it to get out. Just push the button.
Right.
There it is.
That's right.
So I've got some comments or questions in the chat. Actually, I think you covered the first one, which is, aren't Arab Semites as well? I believe you did touch on that. I
Yeah.
don't know if you want to enlarge on that a little bit.
Well, anti-Semitism, just to repeat, it's a word that was used to describe hatred of the Jews in the late 19th century by an anti-Semite, small s, because he certainly was only interested in hating Jews. But that's why it's very good to spell it without the capital S, because it really has nothing to do with a racial group. It was entirely a focus on Jews. So sadly, but it's interesting that I read someone a couple weeks ago, I forgot who it was, who said, I refuse to use the word anti-Semitism because of the history of the word. It's very similar, by the way, to the word, let's say, Protestant, protesters. Protestant was a pejorative, a very negative word to be used against Luther and what he was trying to do in the 16th century. But the Protestants took that word and called themselves Protestants, even though it started out as a negative term. So there are probably other precedents historically. Even the word like Pharisee, which was one of the Jewish sects in the Second Temple, Prushim means those who separated themselves. It was used by the enemies of the Pharisees, but they ended up calling themselves Prushim, Pharisees, eventually. So I don't know. I use the word anti-Semitism unless you feel differently. It's just a way of describing the phenomenon that we've introduced. I've tried to introduce you to today.
Right. Okay.
It's an interesting question, though.
We have one of our members wants to know if you would be able to share a copy of that outline with us.
Oh,
that you used for your
absolutely.
speech.
I'll tell you what, I'll send it. Who should I send it to?
So why don't you send it to Al and he can
Send
distribute
it
it
to
out. All right.
Perfect. You got it. I'll
He's your
have
main
it
contact.
done as soon as we say goodbye to Al.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
And Paula,
Al.
yes, this is being recorded and you'll see a link on YouTube about it. Murray Simon, who is a member of a clergy, one of our retired cantors who's very active with us.
We've been in touch.
Okay, so he's asking, is Israel an apartheid state? And I guess he's simply asking that in regards to how some people like to categorize Israel, if you want to touch on that.
I love to. It's one of my favorite subjects right now in opposing that horrible description. The big lie continues. I mentioned Exodus 1. It's all about the propaganda. If you dehumanize a group of people, if you categorize them as racist, like South Africa, and make people think that Arabs are drinking from different water faucets and live in separate neighborhoods in Israel and are discriminated completely, apartheid state, and we have some members of the United States Congress who are doing that randomly now. Because it's very effective politically. If you want to, it's like the BDS movement and the anti-apartheid movement. You know who started that, by the way, just for the historical record, was Jimmy Carter when he wrote his book about the Jewish state being an apartheid state. He wrote that, I would guess, let's see, when he finished, probably around 1985, 90. Don't quote me on that. I don't remember. But I remember when that book came out, we were so angry at him for that label, and it caught on. He very successfully branded Israel as a pariah state. That's what this is all about. And we have to be, I just, what your rabbi does, I'm in touch with this imam in California that we used to teach at Chapman University together. His name is Muzamil Siddiqui. He's a very nice gentleman, but boy, are we in polar opposites on when there's something like this happens. He always writes to me to help tell me how terrible Israel is. And he showed me this petition that sadly was signed on to by about 7 rabbis, that Israel is an apartheid militaristic state that arrests Arabs willy-nilly every day. I mean, it's just an awful piece of so I've been, of course, I respond to this. I don't know why I respond sometimes, but I told someone here, someone's got to just keep the banner of Israel alive. And I just can't take that sitting down anymore. I call it a big blood libel. It's, Hamas has used human shields. Sadly, innocent people have been used for their propaganda efforts. And a lot of this, and now this propaganda of apartheid and used by a terrorist group that wants to annihilate not only Israel, but to kill Jews. It's in their charter. Use the shields of lies in order to advance their nefarious intentions. So I think that we really need to know, first of all, what apartheid is, how horrible that was in South Africa. And we need to tell people, listen, one of my favorite pet projects here, because I had a member who was a big benefactor of the University of Haifa. And the University of Haifa is an incredible place. 1/3 of the student body are Arabs. And I went up there a few times, saw what they did, integrated with the Jewish students in their laboratories and their music sessions. And the Israeli government subsidizes these Arab students to get education, which they can't get anywhere else in the Middle East. Arabs sitting on the Israeli Supreme Court. One of my dearest friends is Bassem Eid, who's a very prominent Palestinian journalist, is very pro-Israel. Arabs who speak fluent Hebrew, integrated in Israeli society, whose standard of living isn't even close to any other Arab population in the Middle East. Arabs live with Jews, especially in Haifa, areas like that. Integrated at Hebrew University, all the major institutions, the sporting teams. This is not South Africa, period. And Israel is done more than any other European or Western country to integrate people who are Arabs, who are Muslims into their society than any other society in the world. I have incidents I'd share with you, but that's the fact. So don't let them lie anymore. We can't take it any longer. I can't.
Okay.
Sorry, I get a little passionate.
That's all right. We want to hear it, and we have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
I'm sorry. I'm going to
no, Rabbi, that's all right. We can go over time. Gene, I'm going to get to your written question in a moment. I just want to tell the Rabbi one thing, and then I'm going to ask for a hand for questions. Just to let you know what kind of community you're moving into. When the Tree of Life synagogue attack took place a few years ago, that Saturday, that Shabbat, while we were having every synagogue in the community was packed wall to wall, and we had extra security. Out in front of our synagogue, there were about a dozen or 18 or so folks from the local mosque who were holding signs in support of us, telling us that they were with us, that they will stand by us and protect us. And then myself and a couple other people went out there and we spoke to them, and then we invited them in. They came in for the closing prayers for Shabbat, and then they joined us at Kiddush, and we all sat in brotherhood and fellowship. It was beautiful. It was a tragedy that was turned into a beautiful thing. And it was something.
That's another thing I always tell people: just because they're bad lemons out there, there are a lot of good people, and we have to try to outreach to the Muslim community, to anybody, because we need friends, and they come from all over the place, and I'm very passionate about that as well.
Absolutely.
So thanks for that. That makes my heart swell.
It should. Does anyone want to, by a show of hands, anybody want to raise a hand for a question? I know, Eric, you want to speak. I'm going to call on you at the end. But does anyone have a question for the rabbi? Or Eric, do you have a question?
Actually,
go ahead, Eric. Esme does. Go ahead.
Esme has a question for you.
Rabbi, in Spain, with the expulsion of the Jews in 1492, there must be very few Jews in Spain. What is the rate of anti-Semitism in Spain today?
Well, it's there. Like all European countries, they have, it comes mostly from their far left quarters. It's related to the anti-Israel stance of their, but there are also a lot of good folks in Spain who are very much aware of that. I know that the Spanish government has made great attempts to invite Jews who can prove their ancestry in Spain. I've been told that my family has Spanish roots, but I can't prove anything. But there are efforts. My travels to Spain have been pretty positive. There is a woman in Granada, Cano, I forgot her first name. She teaches Jewish studies at the University of Granada. If we ever have a chance to be there, she's fabulous, and she's led a lot of people to understanding Judaism and Jewish life. So there are these great efforts made there. I'm not an expert on Spain, but my guess is it's there like any other European country. But I think in general it's kept fairly quiet there. Same in Italy, the Mediterranean areas. I think the most interesting one right now is Germany. For why Germany again, where you have so many people who have really tried to teach their population, and they have a member in their Bundestag on the cabinet there, Felix Klein, whose portfolio is anti-Semitism, and yet they're having an explosion of anti-Semitism there, which is really hard to take. But then you have a country like Austria, and they're flying the Israeli flag on their parliament building, which is incredible because the Austrians have been behind the Germans in dealing with their Holocaust past. So it's so confusing. All I can say, Esme, is that it's just so hard to keep track of all of this, and changes all the time, and different political factions, and the wars being fought over Jews on the Israel issue, frankly. So we'll see. That's a good question. Who can I ask about Spain in general? I love talking about Spain, by the way. I love to teach about 1492 and the Jews from 1391 and Jewish life in Christian Spain and Muslim Spain. It's quite a great story, but that's for a later course.
Eric, I'm going to come back to you for the wrap up. I just wanted to get one. I think we just have time for this one last question. This is from a congregant, Gene Ginsburg, who is asking about your opinion of the effect of the large rate of intermarriage, if you think that would have any effect in reducing the incidence of anti-Semitism.
Well, they've shown that actually interfaith marriage has helped the anti-Semitism issue because it's brought a lot of non-Jewish families into a Jewish fold, if you will. I don't know. I don't know what the studies really show. That's all from the little that I've read about that.
No, it's
I'm missing something here.
Somebody unmuted.
That's a difficult question to answer. The issue of intermarriage is very complex, and every situation is different. I think the anti-Semitism facet of that is really separate from what that means to the Jewish community today and to our future, and how to turn that into a positive. It's a great challenge. But, and as from my experience, every interfaith couple, family is different. They all have different challenges. Their families are different. Their desires are different, where they want to go with that. I've like to think I've had great success in bringing those families into the Jewish community. And we already have, by the way, I've been in touch with one couple and 2 other individuals about conversion to Judaism. I haven't even started yet, which is interesting. So when I get there, you'll help me with that one, what you've done in the past, and what your experience has been, and we'll tackle that one together.
All
It's
right.
a good challenge.
Excellent. Thank you. We're just about out of time. Eric, I'm going to circle back to you. I know you would like to say a few words. This is our president, Eric Ferber.
Old friend.
Good afternoon, Rabbi Altshuler. Firstly, a very, very warm welcome to you all and to you. And this is certainly your inaugural presentation to us. And I think this augurs brilliantly for the future. This was absolutely spectacular today. And you could see from people requesting outlines already and wanting to know if this is being recorded, that sort of speaks so well to your presentation. And I think for all of us, it was certainly very comprehensive from the present times right until today. And each one of the points you could probably give us a separate lecture on. And so I'm sure Al will hold you to that in future. We've got a lot of lectures still to hear from you. But
I never in my life have turned down an opportunity to teach. It's a passion of mine. So Al, get ready.
So I think that I think you touched on a lot of the problems, especially nationally and internationally. Besides all the problems in Israel, we are now confronted with increasing problems of anti-Semitism here, exacerbated by recent events. And I think that the message to us all is we all have to stand together. This is the overriding point that you made today, whether it be locally here in Sarasota, the Jewish community needs to be strong and stick together, and nationally. So Rabbi Altshuler, we all send you our best wishes. We thank you for a brilliant presentation, and we're counting the days. London's loss is our gain. So thank you once again.
We'll have a lot of visitors.
Excellent.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank you
Rabbi.
so much
Thank
for
you,
your
Eric, for that.
continued
And
kindness.
everyone stay well and
Thank you.
stay safe. And we'll see you at the next
See you next week.
Yes.
Be well, everybody, and an early Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Take
Shalom.
care.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Wonderful.